The family of four was finally getting a break from the suffocating routine that had defined their lives for months. David, the father, had undergone a complicated surgery just a few months prior. It had been a harrowing experience for all of them, seeing him in such a vulnerable state, struggling to regain his strength. As he slowly recuperated, the family dynamics had shifted. Lila, the mother, had grown weary and stressed, her relationship with their children, Luke and Megan, fraying as she struggled to hold everything together. But now, with David on the mend and eager for an adventure, they saw an opportunity for a long overdue escape. "This is exactly what we need," David said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and determination as he loaded the last bag into the trunk. His eyes gleamed with excitement. Lila watched him, a smile tugging at her lips. She had missed seeing him like this, so full of life. She glanced over at the kids in the back seat. Luke and Megan were already absorbed in their devices, oblivious to the world outside. "All right, everyone ready for the wilderness?" she called out, trying to inject some enthusiasm into her voice. Megan looked up and shrugged while Luke simply nodded. Not the most encouraging response, but it was something. The drive to the woods was long but scenic. As the car wound through the mountains, they were surrounded by thick forests that stretched out like a living, breathing tapestry. The trees were colossal, their ancient boughs intertwined, casting intricate shadows across the road. David hummed softly along with the radio, stealing glances at his family. This would be good for them, he thought. A chance to bond, away from the distractions of daily life. After several hours, they stopped at a rundown gas station nestled at the edge of a small town. It looked like a relic from another era, with faded signs and rusted gas pumps. David filled up the tank while Lila wandered over to a group of locals sitting outside, seeking advice on the best camping spots in the area. One of the men, a grizzled figure with sunken eyes and a deep, gravelly voice, rattled off a list of places, pointing out spots on a worn map Lila had brought. But then he paused, his expression darkening as his finger hovered over a section marked Forest of Ash. "Don't go near this part," he warned, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Strange things happen there. The animals avoid it, and the trees themselves seem to whisper secrets you don't want to hear." Lila raised an eyebrow. "Why? What's the story?" The man glanced at his companions, who looked equally unsettled. "Some say there's a witch in those woods. Been there for centuries. She's not the kind of spirit you want to mess with. The forest itself is her domain, and those who enter often find themselves lost." Intrigued and a little skeptical, Lila returned to the car and recounted the story to David and the kids. Megan's eyes lit up. "A witch? That's so cool!" she exclaimed, finally showing some interest in the trip. Luke grinned, nudging his father. "Let's go there. We love scary stories, right?" David chuckled. "What do you think, Lila? A little adventure into the forbidden woods?" Lila hesitated, glancing back at the locals who still watched them with grim expressions. A shiver ran down her spine, but she shook it off. "All right, why not? It's just a story," she replied, trying to sound casual. "Besides, we've come all this way for an adventure, haven't we?" With the decision made, they piled back into the car and headed toward the Forest of Ash. The sky began to darken as they drove deeper into the wilderness. The road narrowed, lined with trees so tall and dense that they blocked out most of the sunlight. The air grew colder, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves wafting through the open windows. After another hour of winding roads, they finally arrived at a small clearing in the forest. David parked the car and they unloaded their camping gear, setting up their tents as twilight settled over the woods. As the last light of day slipped away, the forest seemed to come alive. Strange noises filled the air, the rustling of leaves, distant snaps of branches, and what sounded like faint whispers carried on the wind. They sat around a small campfire, sharing stories and laughing, trying to shake off the unsettling atmosphere that surrounded them. For the first time in months, it felt like they were a family again. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the biting cold of the forest, which encroached upon them like an unwelcome guest. "We should explore the woods tomorrow," Luke suggested, his voice filled with excitement. "See if we can find any signs of this witch." Megan nodded eagerly. "Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll actually find something." Lila shot David a look, and he nodded reassuringly. "All right," he said, smiling. "Tomorrow, we'll go on a little adventure." But as they lay in their tents that night, the strange noises grew louder. The whispers became more distinct, almost as if someone or something was speaking just outside their camp. Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the tent, her heart pounding. She thought she heard a soft laugh, high-pitched and eerie, drifting through the trees. She shook David awake. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He listened for a moment, frowning. "It's just the wind," he murmured, pulling her close. "Go back to sleep." Reluctantly, she closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Outside, the forest seemed to watch, to wait. The next day, they ventured into the forest, following a narrow path that wound through the dense undergrowth. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wet earth. As they moved deeper into the woods, an unsettling quiet descended. The usual sounds of birds and insects were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the wind had stilled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "See?" Megan said, her voice tinged with bravado. "Nothing to be afraid of." But as the day wore on, the path seemed to twist and change. They passed the same clusters of trees repeatedly, their bark marked with strange, spiraling symbols. David's unease grew. He tried to maintain a calm facade for his family's sake, but a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. By late afternoon, they decided to head back to camp, but the way seemed different, distorted. Trees that they swore they had marked were missing, replaced by new ones that stretched toward the sky like skeletal hands. "We're lost," Lila whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "No, we just need to retrace our steps," David replied, his tone steady, though his heart raced. "We'll find our way back." But they didn't. As dusk settled, they found themselves back at the clearing where they had started. The campfire was still there, now nothing but cold ashes. An unnatural chill hung in the air, making their breath mist. That night, the forest grew more menacing. Shadows danced just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. The whispers returned, louder, clearer, circling the camp like a predator stalking its prey. They huddled together, fear palpable in the darkness. Then, from somewhere deep within the forest, they heard it, a soft, melodic humming, like a lullaby sung by an ancient, cracked voice. "It's her," Luke breathed, his eyes wide with terror. "The witch." The following days blurred into a nightmare. Every attempt to leave the forest led them back to the clearing, as if the woods themselves had reshaped to trap them. The forest no longer felt natural. It seemed to close in on them, the trees growing thicker and taller, blocking out the sun. Strange things began to happen at night. Lila awoke to find small piles of stones arranged in intricate patterns around their tents. Megan heard whispers in her ear, coaxing her to leave the campfire and venture into the darkened woods. Luke saw fleeting shadows, figures that lurked just beyond his line of sight. David, the anchor of the family, began to crumble. He awoke one morning with scratches across his back, as if clawed hands had raked across his skin during the night. "We need to get out of here," Lila cried, her voice breaking as they sat around the dying campfire. "We can't stay another night." David nodded, his face gaunt and hollow. "Tomorrow we'll try again," he muttered, though he no longer believed in his own words. The forest had claimed them, and he feared they would never escape. That night, as they huddled in their tents, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside their minds, threading through their thoughts like a cold, slithering serpent. The voice was old, cruel, dripping with malice. It spoke of their fears, their regrets, taunting them with their weaknesses. Then it changed. The voice grew sweet, almost inviting, as it whispered promises of freedom, of escape. It called to each of them by name, urging them to step into the forest, to leave the safety of the campfire's dwindling light. "Come to me," it sang, a melody both beautiful and horrifying. "Come, and I will show you the way." David awoke to find Megan missing from her tent. His heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, calling her name. Lila and Luke joined him, their faces pale with terror. "She's gone," Lila sobbed, her hands trembling as she gripped David's arm. "No, she's here somewhere," David insisted, though fear clawed at his mind. "We have to find her." They plunged into the forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them in a cacophony of voices. Lila screamed, stumbling backward as a shadow darted past her, laughter echoing in its wake. Then they heard it, a soft giggle, Megan's giggle, coming from the depths of the woods. "Megan!" Luke cried out, sprinting toward the sound. "Megan, where are you?" The forest seemed to shift around him, the trees bending and twisting to block his path. He pushed forward, his breath ragged, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of his sister. And then he saw her. She stood in a small clearing, bathed in an ethereal light. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unseeing. Behind her, a figure loomed, cloaked in darkness. It was a woman, or at least what had once been a woman. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow pits of darkness that bore into Luke's soul. Her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile as she raised a hand, long fingers ending in sharp, claw-like nails. "The witch," Luke breathed, frozen in terror. The witch's voice slithered into his mind, soft and venomous. "Your sister is mine now," she whispered. "You all are." Luke stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "No, please, let her go," he begged. The witch laughed, a sound that chilled the very marrow in his bones. "You entered my forest, and now you will stay," she hissed. Suddenly, David and Lila burst into the clearing, gasping as they saw Megan and the dark figure behind her. The witch raised her arms, and the forest erupted into chaos. Branches lashed out, wrapping around their limbs, pulling them to the ground. "No!" David roared, struggling against the supernatural force. "Leave my family alone!" The witch bent down, her face inches from his. "Your love brought you here," she crooned. "And love is what I will consume." Megan stepped forward, her movements stiff and unnatural. She turned to face her family, her eyes now as dark and empty as the witch's. She opened her mouth, but the voice that came out was not her own. "Leave," she whispered. "But know this, the forest will never let you go." The ground beneath them trembled, and the trees seemed to sway and part, revealing a path that led into the darkness. The branches around David, Lila, and Luke released their grip, dropping them to the forest floor. David staggered to his feet, his heart breaking as he looked at his daughter. "Megan," he choked out. "Go!" she repeated, her face expressionless. "Run!" With no other choice, they turned and fled, sprinting down the newly formed path. The forest closed in behind them, the witch's laughter echoing in their ears. They ran until their lungs burned, until the light of dawn finally broke through the canopy above, revealing the road where their car was parked. They stumbled out of the woods, gasping, sobbing. Behind them, the forest loomed, dark and impenetrable. David turned, staring into the shadows. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw Megan standing there, her face serene. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. They climbed into the car, and David turned the key. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving the forest of ash behind. But as they drove, the whispers followed them, clinging to their minds like a dark fog. And in the rearview mirror, David caught a glimpse of his daughter's face, staring back at him from the depths of the forest. They had escaped, but the witch's whisper would haunt them forever. They had ventured into the forest seeking adventure, but what they found was a darkness that would never let them go. And somewhere deep in the heart of the forest, the witch stood in her domain, smiling,